Hello and welcome to the Empowering Law Firm Leaders podcast. We'll be talking to experts across the legal sector to discover the mindsets, behaviours, skills and digital tools that are needed to run a successful modern law firm. I'm Amy Bruce, host and marketing director at Osprey Approach. Today, I'm joined by a family law associate solicitor at Burkitt's who has almost a decade of experience in law. They're also a member of the Law Society's Junior Solicitors Network Advisory Committee and the National Junior Lawyers Division, and is an advocate for equality, diversity, and inclusion in the profession. Nusrat Sadiq, welcome, Nusrat. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Amy.
So, today in our conversation, we'll be focusing on how to empower the next generation of law firm leaders. We'll cover how to foster a culture that encourages leadership at all levels and balances the need of junior lawyers and the business. We'll also cover the top concerns from junior lawyers, their impact on innovation, and how to rethink supervision and training. But first, Nusrat, before we get started, tell us a little bit about your background and experience that's led you to where you are today.
Sure. Thanks, Amy. So I actually took quite a traditional route into the profession. So I studied law at the University of Surrey. I went on to complete the LPC and then I secured a training contract. And since qualifying in 2019, I've worked in regional law firms and specialised exclusively in private family law. But even though sort of the route that I've taken looks quite traditional on paper, I'd say that the journey itself wasn't very traditional at all. And I actually really relate to aspiring solicitors who really struggle with getting legal experience because I remember applying for work experience, vacation schemes, open days, and I didn't get through. So my parents also didn't go to university, so there were no particularly lawyers in the family. So I didn't have those sort of ready-made connections in the legal profession to rely on. So it kind of forced me to think outside of the box about sort of how I can demonstrate my commitment to the law. So I sort of I attended free university seminars on legal topics and used to sit in public hearings at my local court, which actually led to sort of an unexpected opportunity to shadow a judge. So I sort of used those sort of experiences to demonstrate my commitment to the law. And I also volunteered at charity shops and worked at just your farmers market. So those jobs those jobs really important because they sort of taught me about dealing with people. And I think ultimately good customer service is just good client care, which is a big part of being a solicitor. So once I sort of got to qualifying, I chose family law because it's not just about legal issues. You're sort of supporting people through some of the most difficult, emotionally stressful times of their lives. And so there's that human connection and that client contact, which I didn't feel I got in many other areas of practice. And that's sort of what keeps me passionate about the work, you know, the sense that you're genuinely helping people move forward at a really challenging time. So yeah, that's where I am now. I'm at Burkitt's, and it's really enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, I know we'll be coming on later in our conversation to talk about
Mhm.
advice and guidance, but
Mm.
I think coming from hearing your story and how you got to where you are today, I think that ability to get stuck in and put yourself out there seems to be a really key message to give to junior lawyers. Would you say that that's the reason you're successful and where you are today?
I think, yeah, you do need to have a lot of resilience. It's not an easy profession. And, you know, accessibility in the profession is really, it still needs some work. But I think, you know, resilience and having the passion and, you know, not sort of giving up. That's, if you really want it, you know, go for it. That's my advice.
Yeah, absolutely. So starting with the good advice, top of the conversation. Thank you for sharing. So, well, firstly, I also want to thank you for coming back to join me on the podcast because you were recently part of our panelist for our Build Better Habits series. And in that episode, we started the conversation on empowering the next gen of leaders. So I'm really excited to dive deeper into that conversation with you today. So I just want to start by understanding the current landscape of what it's like for junior lawyers out there. So from your vantage point in the junior solicitors network, what are the top concerns or priorities that you hear from junior lawyers entering the profession today?
Yes, so I think I sort of touched on it a bit earlier, but just one of the biggest concerns I hear from aspiring or junior lawyers is the accessibility into the profession. I think the competition is getting more and more intense, and there's a lot of financial barriers as well to entry. So when you combine all of that, sort of with the pressure to secure high quality work experience. It's easy for a lot of lawyers and aspiring lawyers to feel the path is completely out of reach. So I think law firms need to think about making the profession more accessible, and more having more initiatives to ensure that there's a diverse profession and we're getting talent from everywhere, because at the end of the day, like our profession, legal profession, is to reflect society, and so it needs to really be reflective. So yeah, I think that's the main sort of concern, is how inaccessible it can feel a lot of the time.
Yeah, you make a good point that the profession should reflect society, and of course, regardless of the key skills that you need to be a lawyer, like you said, it's a people world, and if you
Mm,
can relate and if you're can build those relationships with those in society, then that's gonna help you help them. And I can appreciate that for a lot of people. I mean, myself, I'd never considered to have gone into the legal
mm,
sector. And I guess I
mm,
was fairly academic at school. Yeah,
mm.
it still wasn't on my radar.
Yeah,
And you feel like that's still the same today.
I think it is. I think it is. But I think there is more change that's happening since I sort of, when I was doing my training contract. I think a lot of firms offer sort of apprenticeships and things like that. So I do think it's changing, but I think we do need to become still a lot more inclusive and diverse as a profession. I remember sort of when I was starting out, I didn't really see any Muslim women in particular wearing the hijab. So you didn't really see that, okay, the profession might have people like me. So I think that's really important, is to make sure that we are a diverse profession, and law firms are thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think businesses sometimes think about that for the companies that they have now, but I
Mm.
don't think they necessarily think about that for talent attraction and for
Yes,
junior lawyers, that they just
yes,
think about how they feel today.
exactly. And there's missed opportunities by just sort of focusing like that, for law firms.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there with those people who are passionate and take that leap and don't take no for an answer and who are similar to yourselves,
Mm.
what is it that what is driving them? What are their priorities to come into the legal sector with all these barriers in place, do you think?
I think for me is I sort of knew that I had, the skill set for customer service, or, these skills, and I really wanted to put them to use, because at the end of the day, your job is a big part of your personality, and your personality needs to reflect that. So I sort of knew that, okay, this is the type of profession I want to go into, and sort of thinking still outside of the box and making sure I'm doing things so I can build connections. I didn't really expect it to happen as quickly as it did for me. But I think you need to give it some time, and still, there's build up a framework and a strategy in your head as to, this is what I'm going to do to make my brand. And so any law firm that I'm applying to, I can say, look, I've done all this work, and I have something to give. And not just necessarily focusing on your academics. Like, I think people focus a bit too much sometimes on the academics, but some of the greatest, like, lawyers, supervisors, not everybody has gone to the top universities. So I think that's sort of a bit of a myth. I think you need to be like we always hear, be a rounded individual. And so, not just focus on your academics. What else do you do that shows you're passionate? What other skills can you bring in? Um, uh, and like, not to feel overwhelmed by the fact that law and the legal sector is sometimes put at a really high pedestal, that sometimes you think, okay, it's not for me, it's out of reach. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to just keep driving yourself, really. And I just knew I wanted to do it, really. And that's what sort of I was like, I need to put a framework in place and show that why I should be invested in. Because at the end of the day, that's what law firms are doing. They're investing in you. So why should they invest in you is like a big question that you need to be able to answer.
Yeah, that's a great question to position yourself towards is why should they invest in you? Because it the competition is so fierce. I
Yes,
mean, like you said, it's still restrictive. So there's a lot of people who wouldn't even consider the legal sector, but even those that do, it's still super competitive. So you
yes,
need to be able to stand out.
yeah,
And I like the advice that it's not necessarily just your academic skills or qualifications. Actually,
mm,
sometimes those things that sit outside of that are the best mirror of who you are and what you can
mm,
achieve.
yeah.
So, what do you think law firm leaders, flipping that slightly a little, what do
Mm.
you think law firm leaders most often misunderstand about the next generation of lawyers?
So I think law firm leaders often misunderstand. I think junior lawyers and their idea of a boundaries. I
Mm.
think we're much more sort of clearer about what is healthy and sustainable for us in terms of work. Um, but I think that can also be misinterpreted as sort of a lack of ambition, and not wanting to work hard, when I think it's actually the opposite. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of junior lawyers, aspiring lawyers that are incredibly driven, and they want to progress in their law firms. They want to do the high quality work, but they just want to build long-term careers without sacrificing their well-being. So I think that can sometimes be misinterpreted, the setting of boundaries. It's not about doing less work, it's just working in a way that's sort of healthy and ultimately more productive. um, I mean, I've seen it a lot. Like, I mean, it's questions of, transparency around pay, progression, flexibility, and, a culture that is supportive. I think that's something that's really important to junior lawyers now. And overall, that really just benefits law firms just as much as it benefits the individuals. You want retention. So if you're looking after your employees, and especially your junior lawyers, making sure that they are developing in their career, then I think that's a win-win, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're, I mean, it's the age-old debate, isn't it? And I'm sure every generation looks at the next generation and
Yeah.
says the same thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, you hear a lot that the next gen are lazy, quote
Mm,
unquote. They don't want to work as hard. They're not
mm,
prepared to work out of hours.
yeah,
But I think you're right. I think that is misunderstood because they set clear boundaries that they're not willing to move and they're not
yeah,
willing to shift because they feel
yeah,
so passionately about how that suits them and how
mm,
that's right for their well-being. So I do think there is a misunderstanding there.
mm.
How do you feel? How do you feel that could be combated, perhaps? Is there a communication style that needs to be adapted? What do you think is the solution there?
I do think that there needs to be transparency. I think law firms need to be transparent about, what their expectations are, so that
Mm,
it's, clear to that junior lawyer, this is what I need to do. If it's not the right fit for you, then, it might be the firm that you need to, look at elsewhere. But having that transparency, that way everybody knows what they're getting into. I think that's really important. And also, like you said, communication. I mean, invite those junior lawyers to the table and see what are their priorities. What do they want to make a sustainable long-term career at that firm? I think there's small things that can be done to sort of understand what is important to junior lawyers in the next gen. And those everyone needs to be heard. It's all about long term, really. So, and the junior lawyers, I think, they are definitely the future of the profession. So, for that law firm to be successful and have longevity, you need to take into account what people at the more junior end want from their career. So, yeah, I do think communication and transparency are really important.
yeah, absolutely. And they're not only the future of the leadership, but they're the future of your client base as
Yeah,
well. Those people who are going to be buying houses, owning
yeah,
businesses are going to be that next generation. So,
mm,
yeah, I think that transparency and communication style is, like you said, beneficial across the board. I
yeah,
think your advice for setting out clear expectations and not making assumptions, I
yes,
mean, is just golden advice for life, really. I
yeah,
think having mismatched expectations is impacts so much. So
exactly.
yeah, I think that's really brilliant advice to really have that laid out, far more clearer than perhaps, the leaders of today had when they started out. But that's where the adaptation comes in.
Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned retaining talent and looking long term. So attracting and retaining talent is always cited as a top operational challenge. It doesn't matter what
Mhm.
research piece you look at, it's always up there in the top three. One of which is Barbary. They produced a report, they're global leaders in legal education, and they back this up, finding that 48% of firms are facing challenges retaining people. So what is it that the next gen of lawyers actually value most when deciding where to work and therefore where to stay in their work?
Yeah, so from what I've sort of discussed as part of the different roles I have in the Law Society, etc., I definitely say culture of the firm is something that is really important. It's really important for the next generation that they're joining a firm with sort of proper supervision in place, sort of investment into them and support. I think the word support is really, really important. Um, and not just a culture that, you know, has develops the legal skills, but also to develop somebody's confidence. I think those are sort of really important things. The culture is really important. And um, I think it's really I think it's, law firms, we need to sort of move on from just focusing on billables. I think it's very clear from the start of your career, you're really told that the firm is a business. And so figures and hitting targets is really important to, maintain the business. But I don't necessarily agree with the fact that that approach develops people. And I don't think it certainly retains them. I think we need to move away from just looking at lawyers as figures and more towards looking at lawyers as people because that leads to retention. Anybody can sort of do the work, but to retain talent, it requires something beyond that. So, you mentioned about Barbary, and I think I found a statistic I wanted to share about it's leaving the profession because of burnout. So I think there was a report done last year. And it surveyed more than sort of 800 senior figures across the UK and US firms. And they found that 16% of junior associates and 17% of senior associates walked away from private practice in the last 12 months. And that was up from 9% in both groups in 2024. So it is a big thing, burnout and, culture of a firm truly feeling supported and is what's going to make them stay. I mean, the figures sort of speak for themselves. So yeah, that's what I think would really drive retention.
Yeah, I mean, the billable hour comes up in every conversation you can
Mm,
ever have. I mean, we're talking
yes,
about the next gen of leaders and culture, and the billable hour is coming up in conversation. It's definitely a hot topic right now and something that
yes,
needs to be seriously considered.
yeah.
But I think, yeah, again, culture always sits at the heart of this. And I think what firm leaders or any business leaders really struggle with is the ability to put their finger on what their culture really is and then
Mm,
move the needle, regardless of what
mm,
the evidence suggests, how to then change a culture. And that is a difficult task. It's not
yeah,
something that can be done overnight. But
no,
I think my advice, and I'd love to hear your opinion, is you feel culture. The moment you step into a law firm, the moment you step into a team, the moment you have the first call, you sense that culture. And that's how you get a feel for, okay, what are we dealing with right now and where do we want to be? Do you feel the same?
I do. I feel, especially at my law firm, I feel like the culture is what drove me to join. There's
Mm.
there's people here who are there to support you when you need it. You just need to be brave and say, okay, I need help. I think that's something that as junior lawyers especially we sometimes struggle with, but I do think, yeah, culture is super important, and there's some changes that law firms can make to sort of create retention and change their culture, which is so, for example, a genuine feedback culture. So not just, your annual performance reviews, regular, constructive conversations about what that person's doing well, what's maybe something that they can, develop a bit better, or what support they need to do that. Um, and I also think those sort of conversations open the doors for those long-term career goals, and sharing that, um, which is something that I think a lot of junior lawyers feel is missing from law firms, and the culture of okay, how am I going to move forward, or can I move forward, or is the spot still, taken by somebody else? Is there going to be change? Is there going to be, so many questions. So I think those feedback um, sessions are not just good for the individual, but also the firm to know, okay, this is what my employee wants. How can I help them? And as they've been so transparent about what they want, like, this is what I need to do. So I think there's small things that can be done to foster that culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I like your idea of the career progression, the firms that I speak to who are doing this well have got this nailed in
Mm.
terms of what's coming up, what's available, what do you need to do to
Yeah.
get there. And again, that goes back to your point of expectation and assumption. Let's not assume these people or anybody knows what needs to be done to get
Mm.
where they want to go. And let's not assume everybody wants to have the same path
Yeah.
as maybe, the current leaders do. I think that's a big discussion I'm sure that's happening in your committee groups and advisory groups
Yeah.
as to what does the future actually mean for
Yes.
junior lawyers. Um, so are you able to share some simple, practical changes that firms can perhaps make today, tomorrow,
Mm.
that would have a meaningful difference in retaining junior lawyers? If we know that they want transparency and better communication, what are some things that firms could look to do?
So I think the 360-degree feedback is a really good thing that a lot of law firms have now implemented. So, juniors get to share what they feel matters, and and sort of they feel that the firms are taking into account how they feel. It's a really good way actually to just have a simple conversation to find out what needs to be improved for a junior lawyer. It's a very simple way just to ask them, really. And then I think the second sort of culture, something you can do in terms of culture, is have a structured mentoring scheme and supervision, like have actual, you know, pairing of junior lawyers with mentors who aren't just there to just oversee their legal work, but to help them build confidence and navigate the profession and feel like somebody is in their corner. Because this legal profession, sometimes you do feel quite isolated, especially when you're a junior lawyer. You just sort of get told what to do. So to have somebody build up your confidence and be there is a really good thing, and that is a great culture for a law firm to implement. And yeah, I've got a mentor myself, and it just sometimes when you don't necessarily want to talk to them about the work, but just how you're feeling and how you're coping, because when you enter the profession, it can be very fast paced. You sometimes don't, you sort of lose yourself sometimes. And so just, take a step back, speak to somebody about, how to manage things, how to speak up when you need to, not just the legal skills. So I think that's really important. And a good mentor really can make a massive difference about how someone feels supported day to day. And that a lot of the time it's support that keeps people in the firm. And so I think small changes like that could be really good.
Yeah, it's that feeling of being seen, isn't it? That
Yes.
that you matter and that you're not just a cog. You matter to the future and current success of the business. And
Yeah.
I think you're so right. The
Yeah.
first piece of advice is just ask the question. It's
Yeah.
really is that simple.
Yeah.
Even that act of bothering to ask is a sign that you care,
Yeah.
even if whatever is suggested can't be done for
Done. Yeah.
whatever reason.
But at least you've given somebody the opportunity to have some space and feel heard and feel seen, and have a voice in what can sometimes be a very, very, very big company business organization.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you sense the suggestions and feedback can't always be taken on and they can't always be implemented.
No.
What do you feel your sense is for the next gen on how best to deliver that sort of feedback of that's not appropriate or thanks for sharing, but do you feel the next generation are pretty resilient in taking that sort of feedback on?
Yeah, I think so. Of course, it's disheartening when something you think is going to be a great idea doesn't get implemented. I mean, but I think, we're a lot more resilient. I think the competition in getting into the legal profession is really hard, and so the people that really want it usually are the ones that are the junior lawyers, and so a lot of resilience is part of getting to a newly qualified solicitor. So I do think, just obviously saying it in a nice way that this isn't something that's possible, but it can. Thank you for your ideas. Thank you for sharing them. It's really important that we hear from you, because you don't know what somebody sort of bright idea somebody can come up with. So still making it still giving them the space afterwards if that initiative isn't taken on to say, okay, we'll still listen to you. This isn't a hard no. And I think, yeah, I think a lot of junior lawyers, if you give them the space, they'll come up with fantastic ideas. I'm sure of it, really, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that are doing a lot of the difficult tasks, and they sometimes come up with really good, efficient ways of doing something. So, yeah, I think resilience. I think we do have a lot of resilience. The junior lawyers I've spoken to and the aspiring lawyers, they do have a lot of resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I mean, I think you have to be resilient to be a lawyer anyway. So
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty core trait
Yeah.
to have. But yeah, I think you're right. For those, it helps to have a new, fresh pair of eyes sometimes
Yeah.
in a sector, in any sector really, but especially the legal sector that is sort of steeped in a lot of tradition. It's nice to have a fresh pair of eyes, and yeah, you never know what bright idea may come out
Mm.
of a conversation like that. So in the panelist discussion you joined us on it in Build Better Habits, we spoke a lot about the importance of leadership at all levels, not just at the top of the chain. Why is having leadership at all levels important, and how do you feel firms can create that and encourage it?
Yeah, so I think it's essential really for any law firm to make to to only have senior people as seen as leaders. You miss out on so many ideas and perspectives and opportunities for growth. Junior lawyers are often the closest to the day-to-day work and the client experience. So encouraging them to take on leadership, it really strengthens the whole firm in terms of building them up with long-term skills. Like you said earlier, they are the future of the profession, so we need to make sure that they're equipped with those skills. Um, and I think sort of the best way to ensure that is encouraged is for law firms to make sure that there's that space again where they feel heard and they have responsibility. And reverse mentoring, implementing regular feedback sessions, which we spoke about, are good ways of sharing ideas, but also inviting junior lawyers to business development conversations and inviting them to present business ideas directly to senior members in the firm. That breaks down the hierarchies, which I think can be a major barrier for a lot of junior lawyers to take on responsibility. And there are also smaller ways to create a culture that encourages leadership. So, for example, celebrating leadership behaviours, and not just lawyers, support staff, etc. If they've taken on initiative or done something strategic or come up with a smart idea, or a junior lawyer supervised a more junior member on a case, celebrating those behaviours and recognizing them can make people feel more confident and more ambitious and more invested, importantly, in the firm. So, yeah, I do think it's really, really important at all levels, and not just lawyers, like non-legal staff as well.
Yeah, I think it's flipping the leadership definition on its head, isn't it? And it's not about leading teams or, being the final person to make a decision. It's
Mm.
about simply taking ownership and
Yeah,
responsibility, which I mean, based on the next gen of people that we have at Osprey or that I deal with every day, that's a key element for them. They want to take on ownership and have
yeah.
responsibility. They want to be autonomous. That's such a driver for them. Do you feel the same?
I do think so. I think, autonomy, you can get into this sort of feeling of, especially when you're a junior lawyer, that you're being micromanaged quite a bit. And so, then you sort of get told, okay, here you go. Now you're at this level PQE, you can go on and do X, Y, and Z now on your own. So I do think, autonomy quite early on is really important, just to make sure that that person is developing as a leader for the future, not just a lawyer, but as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that the legal sector is very sensitive and there's a lot
Yeah,
of rules, and it's important that these things are reviewed and checked and supervised so we're not giving wrong advice to people. But there are so many other things within a law firm that doesn't have that level of risk, that are
mm,
operational and support staff based, that junior lawyers can really get stuck into. I mean, I know we'll talk about tech soon, but
yeah,
it's just a key example of where they can really be left to be autonomous and shine and put their all in.
yes, definitely agree.
So I think, yeah, having leadership at all levels and encouraging people to take on that responsibility is of course really key, and encouraging that space to speak up and share ideas. But I think also, from what you were saying, it seems that having exposure to different areas of the business is also key. How can you possibly share an idea if you're not aware of how that impacts everything else? So I think exposure to the different maybe departments or roles.
Definitely. I think as a lawyer, you have to be you sort of have this idea that I'm just going to be doing the law work and I'm going to be an expert in that and that's it. But I think you learn quite early on that you need to be a good person at marketing the brand and building your own brand and also BD. So that's really important, bringing in clients. So you need to understand how to do that. And so I think you need to have exposure in the marketing department. You need to also understand sort of how your team functions. So how does your team assistant work? What what is their function? There's you're part of a bigger picture. So really understanding that is important as well for being a leader in the futures, because you need to know how is everybody going to drive the firm.
Mm.
What is each person's responsibility, and how can we get the most out of them? That's something that you need to think about when you are in that leadership role. So knowing what everybody does quite early on, and their bit to the law firm is, I think, really important.
Yeah, it helps you slot in your impact
Yeah,
if you know how everyone else is operating. Yeah,
yeah,
I agree with you there. You've touched on mentorship and
yeah.
supervision a little earlier, but how do you think firms should be rethinking supervision? Of course, we've got to meet, as we said, regulatory requirements, but
Mm.
but yeah, how do you think that could be rejigged and reshaped?
Yeah, so I think in terms of regulatory expectations, the SRA, where the law firms are expected to provide proper oversight. And I think in terms of the next generation's expectations, I think there is that expectations of accessibility and support. So in both cases, I think regulatory and expectations from the next generation, it's not making lawyers feel like they have to figure things out on their own. I think that's the main thing. And so I'd say having regular check-ins rather than just ad hoc conversations, and ensuring that supervisors are approachable and, most importantly, available. When supervisors aren't available, the pressure and the responsibility mounts onto the junior just naturally. You might not think it as being a bit more senior, that okay, they don't need to worry about the responsibility, it lies with me. But actually, in reality, it does affect the junior. So availability, accessibility as supervisors, I think that's really, really important.
Think you make a great you highlight a great point there of availability. I think unfortunately, a lot of the law firm leaders or supervisors I see are juggling a full caseload of work, and hours go back to the billable hour that they're
Yeah,
targeted against. And having people who you're supervising or mentoring or leading requires a significant amount of time, going back to all of the
absolutely.
culture things, the feedback. How are you supposed to fit that all in if your 8 hours a
Exactly.
day is packed full of billable hours? So
Yeah,
do you still see that? Is that a challenge in the space and the feedback you're hearing?
definitely. I think it's all about, what I mentioned at the start about the billables. There needs to be some sort of leniency if people are going to be supervisors, for them to be able to do that properly and not have to worry, because having a role as the lawyer and also a supervisor, it's really hard to juggle both. And that's what I'm hearing about, not supervisors not being available. So if the reason for that is because they are having to hit their billable targets as well, maybe the law firms need to look at, the bigger picture here and say, okay, if this is the case, do we reduce the billables? I mean, is that something that they can do for a more senior person so that the junior can be properly developed? I think a lot of the time you sort of hear the word sort of training contract and things like that. And as a junior lawyer, you think, okay, I'm going to get trained. Not necessarily, because a lot of the time you are sort of left to do your own work and things like that. So I do think that law firms need to sort of be a bit more transparent about what, if they can't, for example, have the supervisor be available 24/7 on that day, then make that clear to the junior lawyer. This is what, again, what we're expecting from you. And as a supervisor, this is what I'm going to give you, so that everybody knows what's happening. I think the worst thing is to think that, okay, like, how does this structure work? Like, what is my role here? So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it goes back to expectations and assumptions again, isn't it? Just
Yeah,
making it really clear, making people feel there's nothing worse than feeling like you should know what's happening and you
yeah,
don't. There's
yeah.
really nothing worse than that. And sometimes it is you're not always available for questions, but to have
No,
that structure in place to know when that space will be available,
yeah,
how that operates is
yeah.
just a relief, I can
It
imagine.
is. Yeah, it is a relief. It's but you have to sort of, and I always say to junior lawyers and aspiring solicitors, like, you need to make sure that if you are feeling as if you don't know what's happening, you need to speak up, because
Mm.
when you're in that sort of zone of not knowing, you can make mistakes and you can get stressed out. And obviously, well-being is super important in this profession. And so you need to say to somebody, um, that, okay, can we have a conversation about what, how this can work better?
Yeah, absolutely. You need that. Psychological safety is a bit of a buzzword, but you need to be able
Yeah,
to ask that question. And I think that goes back to culture. You said about availability, but also accessibility. Are
yeah,
they approachable? Do you feel like
yeah,
you can ask a silly question? Everyone needs to be able to ask a silly question every
yeah,
now and then. And I think if you get the sense that that's not possible, maybe with that individual or as the firm as a whole, you do need to consider is if the culture is going to fit you and fit what you need. That's definitely
yeah.
a reasonable question to ask yourself. I just want to touch slightly on the mentorship and supervision. How do you
Yeah.
feel sort of remote working or hybrid working impacts that? How do the junior lawyers are feeding back? Is that creating a disconnection? Are they keen to go back in the office? How's that being managed?
I think it's quite different depending on sort of where you are in your career. I think
Mhm.
I'm hearing from sort of trainees that they find it much better to be in the office because they have their team around them. If they need support, then there's that sort of quite easily available. But then I also think I've heard from people, especially as they're getting more confident, that they like the remote working. They appreciate the fact that they've got a bit of autonomy just through that trust that they can, work from home, for example. And also, I think, it also lets, aside from building your own autonomy, it lets sort of, like, for example, I work from home because I feel like it works for my flexibility. It allows me, if I've got something on, if some BD that day, then I can go from home, or if it's easier. I think there just needs to be flexibility. I think that's the main thing.
Mm.
With and the opportunity to say, okay, I'd appreciate if I could work from home on this day because of, we have, in my office, in my team, we have an anchor day essentially where we're all in on a Tuesday. So we have our team meeting then, and then everybody knows what's happening for the rest of the week. And then if you need to check in, you can check in whether you're working from home or in the office. But I think just giving that option,
Mhm.
um, is something that goes really far, especially with junior lawyers who, the cost of living is really expensive, commuting, things like that. It's something that they would appreciate, especially very early on in your careers when you might not be, at a level where you can of income where you can continue to come into the office 5 times a week. I think that's yeah, I think it's a really positive thing.
Absolutely. Flexibility and options. I think everyone in the workplace can agree, regardless of seniority, that is definitely key.
Yeah.
We touched on earlier potentially the impact of junior lawyers on ideas for innovation and
Yeah.
tech. What role do you think junior lawyers are playing in innovating firms and the future of firms?
Yeah, I think, junior lawyers bring a fresh perspective. So, and like I said, they tend to be more tech confident, questioning sort of old ways of working and how we could work more efficiently. I think especially as junior lawyers, you're giving very, very time consuming tasks. So it's quite easy to spot, okay, this is where a change can be made to work more efficiently. Personally, I love tech, like I love AI, and I think it's making such a good difference and it's super positive that a lot of people are taking it on board. So, for example, the longer tasks, or if you just need a judgment to be summarized, that's what AI is there for, rather than having to, when you've got time consuming tasks like that, um, to use AI. And I think, yeah, I think it's the junior lawyers are playing that role in giving more confidence to senior lawyers as well when it comes to tech. Um, and showing them like this is how this can be done much easier, training essentially upwards. So I think, yeah, I think they're playing a really, really important role.
Yeah, it's that reverse mentoring that you mentioned
Exactly.
earlier. Everyone can get value and learn from one another, and I think
Yeah.
it's an obvious place for junior lawyers to have an impact because they grew up with tech and it's just
Yeah.
their norm. And
Yeah.
actually, sometimes I think their confidence in the norm and experimentation rubs off. So
Yes.
yeah, I think that's important.
Definitely. Yeah.
We've touched on your I guess, traditional career into where you are today, with a few exceptions along the way. But if you could redesign the early careers journey for lawyers, what would you change or improve and why?
I think I'd definitely, I think there's sort of three sort of things that I think three. So I'd say again, more structured mentoring and supervision. I think you must pair juniors with mentors who can assist them with not just the legal skills, but just career progression and confidence, explaining their journey as well, and just having somebody back you in your corner through developing in your career. I'd also think it's really important to make sure law firms encourage junior lawyers' voices to be heard very early on. So, like I explained earlier, give juniors a say in business development and marketing and innovation projects and ED&I policies. That flexibility we spoke about with working from home. I think they can give their input on what works for them, and policies like that could really be shaped by hearing those junior lawyers' voices. And I'd say finally, more focus on practical skills. Teach how business development, works, how to manage clients, particularly in sort of family law and where there are those sort of tricky emotions that you are dealing with on a day to day. How to, make sure that you're managing your clients effectively. How to also make sure that you are managing yourself and your well-being well. So I think that's really important in terms of the career journey, those sort of three things of mentoring, voices being heard, and focusing more on practical skills.
Yeah, I think I've spoken to a few law firm leaders who are more senior in their career and perhaps thinking of succession planning or
Yes.
retiring, and they can all name somebody who was influential and impactful to them in their early careers, who mentored them or who called them out and helped
Mm.
them see, how to develop and improve and believed in them. I think what you said about, fighting their corner and believing in them. I'm sure you have your own people who you could also list who have impacted you. And yeah, I think that's underrated of how much that can shape who you become in your career.
Yeah, definitely. It just gives you an added confidence.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're right. So mentoring sharing those practical skills and going above and beyond just the legal skills. And remind me, what was the second one you mentioned?
It was to sort of encourage junior lawyers' voices to be heard, give them the say in business development, ED&I policies, things that, really shape the law firm so that everybody's voices are implemented in the policies as much as possible.
Of course, yeah, and space to be heard, which I think
Yeah.
wraps up the points that you've mentioned nicely. Just changing approach slightly, but what excites you about the future of the profession?
I mean, I'm so excited about what's going to change in the profession. I think junior lawyers today are really values driven, they're really collaborative, and they're not afraid to ask those important questions about transparency and culture, where that energy sort of is already shaping the profession, I think, because we're now hearing a lot more about boundaries and well-being, which you didn't really hear about before. And I think all of that is going to lead to a much more innovative, empathetic, and more importantly, a sustainable legal profession. So that's what I'm really excited about.
Absolutely. And your passion is rubbing off on me as well. I'm super excited for that too.
Yeah,
And you're right. I'm hearing that in the conversations I'm having with law firm leaders, with juniors, with operational staff and tech, that it's all about strategizing that towards your values and
yes,
the importance of culture. So it's working. So the
yes.
junior lawyers need to keep at it,
Keep
be
at it.
persistent. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely.
Before we finish, I just want to change our focus from sharing advice for law firm leaders today,
Mhm.
but focusing on aspiring leaders who may be listening to this conversation. What's one piece of advice you'd give to a junior solicitor today?
I think I would say don't be afraid to ask for questions or for help. Um, there's that fear of judgment when you're very early on in your career, um, but you're not expected to know everything and you're not expected to suffer in silence. Um, During those sort of early years of your career, you are expected to ask the questions, be curious, learn, and build confidence. So asking the right questions is how you do all of that. So yeah, don't be afraid. People are there to develop you in your career, and you just need to ask.
The word curious is my favorite word. I love that. And actually, I'd hope to extend that advice to everybody listening to be more curious. Everybody should
Yes,
be asking more questions, not just junior lawyers.
yes, yes, and don't feel like you're being that person that is asking too many questions. I don't think there's any harm in that.
Totally agree. Thank you so much, Nusrat, for your knowledge and experience and for sharing everything you're hearing on the ground. I wish you all the best in your success, and I'm excited for the future for the profession, as are you. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Amy, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on the podcast.